is an episode of In-Depth Conversation that's a bit different from what we usually do.
Yes.
We will introduce more who we are and what In-Depth Conversation is all about. So we will be discussing the past year, our thoughts, our struggles, and our work, basically, why we're doing this, what's our motivating, driving force or factor, and what we hope for the future for In-Depth Conversations.
Yeah.
Through our reflections. So yeah, more kind of a conversation between you and I, who are the creators behind this YouTube channel.
Yeah, so this will be somewhat of a meta episode.
Exactly, yeah. So maybe we can start with just saying who we are. Do you want to go first?
Oh, right, sure. So my name is Jonatan Almfjord, and I'm one of many students at Lund University. But I wasn't the first starting In-Depth Conversations, right? That was you.
That was, yeah, that's right. Okay, so I'm Melina and I'm a PhD student in theoretical philosophy here at Lund University as well. Is Lund University the only university you've been to?
I suppose so. I've taken online distance courses, but that's another thing.
Okay.
But yeah. Should I bring up all of my CV?
No, you don't have to do that. I just thought because it's quite interesting. I only have a tiny little bit of insight into Sydney University. I was there for 6 months. Right. But basically most of my time as a student through philosophy and so on, my different subjects, I've been to a few different departments at Lund. Like we both have a background in cognitive science as well.
Yes.
But this is where I've spent majority of my time, and also in Sweden, getting to know how the university works and so on. So that, of course, influences how we understand academia, I think, because I think it's different in every country.
Yeah,
even though we have an ideal, but
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I'm definitely Lund University based in my understanding of academia, so to speak. But like you said, I've been to a few different, faculties, institutions. Yeah.
Quite interesting. So we still have some experiences, but both of us have mostly been in humanities, right?
Yes,
yeah,
that's true. That's true.
So that's quite interesting. But okay, back to In-Depth Conversations. And
yes.
you mentioned that I started the YouTube channel. I only managed to do 2 episodes before you got on board. Yeah. But nevertheless, I think my intentions or my idea with the starting this YouTube channel, this platform, basically.
What's the original idea?
The original idea. I didn't think it through in that detail, in that depth. I think I just had a strong desire to talk in depth with professors and maybe not just professors, but researchers at the university, and what are their ideas and how do they see their work and their research situated in context with the politics of society of our times, how are things done and run behind the scenes, that maybe is not always so obvious when you just read the published papers, that there is a whole person and behind this research and driving factors and so on, and to be able to have a one-on-one conversation. I think that's a huge privilege to have that access. So I really wanted to utilize that and be able to speak to more researchers, and I think that's where I started, and to actually be allowed to ask really all the questions I could think about. So not with a purpose or my purpose was not more than just wanting to find out what they were thinking about certain topics or what led them to think about these things.
Yeah. Because of course there's a difference between talking to academics and researchers and just to further to CC their research into the public, or as to compare to asking somewhat critical questions, perhaps, and pushing back if there's something that you or I find very weird, perhaps, I don't know. Yeah,
or just have more questions about, you know, can you clarify this point? Like, to be able to have that opportunity to do that, I think it's really amazing.
So I suppose that's why, I'm not sure. Do you say that you interview people, or do you say that you have conversations? I mean, in-depth conversations.
Yeah, I like to push the idea that it's a conversation, because an interview is more sort of finding out what that asking questions from that person, but I want it to be a dialogue. To really react to the answers they're giving, and associate it to different things that I've been wondering about, or that we can see is interesting for other people to find out more about. So not just taking things for granted, the answer, just taking the answer, but also trying to shape questions around the conversation. Yeah.
And by the way, does that mean that we as not interviewers, but like conversation leaders, does that mean hosts, right? Does that mean that we have to so I know that we both do research before we have a conversation, of course, but do I have to be expert in an area in which a guest is coming here to talk about? What do you think about that?
I think that's a really good question. I think sometimes it's even better with the opposite.
Yeah, right.
Because I think when you're curious, genuinely curious, you come into it a bit more open, maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, research to actually know what it's about is important, but to think that you already know everything about it, then you don't really, I think, listen maybe as carefully, or do you know what I mean? Like I think it's healthy to have a curiosity as well.
Yeah, the mind of a child, perhaps.
That's right.
But I totally agree. Actually, I found in the discussions that I have had, at least since I have a lot of background in psychology, when I talk to psychologists, then perhaps we move too quickly in certain areas that. Both me and you know about this, so we don't have to specify it. But perhaps the viewer or anyone else doesn't have the same how do you say, pre-knowledge.
I'm guilty of that myself. I think sometimes I've gotten the feedback on some other episodes that we've had where I've been the host, where I've been too narrow, sort of, in my questions, and assuming that people already are well familiar with the debate. I think that can be a disadvantage sometimes, especially when you're trying to also incorporate a public outreach kind of element to our discussion or our conversation.
Right.
And then therefore I forget to bring everybody up to speed, or to keep the listener in mind, So I think you're very right in that. It's an important thing. Yeah.
And if it was the case, which it is not, but if it was the case that we do like talks and conversations in the ivory tower of academia, only for people that already are in academia, that would be a different story, perhaps. That's not really the idea. I think for both of us, we have an idea that we would like to bring whatever is happening in the ivory tower out to people, and we feel like that's an important task, or at least something we want to stimulate more knowledge or more awareness about academic research and what academics do. That is maybe not so accessible for people who are not in academia. Totally. I have a lot of friends and family who should know more about academia, but like I totally understand that they are not innately interested in it, because it's like, you can Google research articles and stuff, and I believe most non-academics have a rather positive picture of academia, but it's still, again, the ivory tower model is kind of, it's somewhere there in the clouds. They sit and do research, and it's probably a good thing, but me as a commoner, I don't get it anyway. That's right. And we forget, but these articles that we publish, it becomes so specialized, so it actually isn't, even though we do this whole thing with open access and so on in Sweden, which is really good, but you get lost in the jargon or in the style of the writing, where it becomes hard to maybe access what the meaning or what the actual results are. And so in that way, I think it's interesting to be able to have the conversation. You definitely have more experience than me about publishing stuff, but I recognize that part as well. Definitely.
It's not very common that you hear somebody actually reading a research article who's not in academia. I mean, it's not the most fun thing to read on a Sunday. So most people get their idea about what research shows through mass media, I would say.
That's true.
Journal or articles in Svenska Dagbladet say, forskning har visat, research has shown. And
and sometimes that might be a totally well-informed and complete picture of what the research actually has been showing. But sometimes it's kind of biased, perhaps, or you omit certain aspects.
That's right.
And then it will be a super sexy headline, but it will be a not very nuanced picture of the research.
Exactly. That's so true when it comes to just hearing it from mass media. So that's I think that's another really important task or aim of this channel. I think, to actually like kind of get a more objective picture of the research, which actually,
we should go to the bullet point list.
I was just going to say this actually takes us to our reflection part of what we want to, what I mentioned in the introduction, that we want to look back at our previous episodes and what we've learned and so on. Do you have a highlight from the past year and a half?
Well, every single conversation that we have been hosting and having has been awesome. None have been totally boring, honestly. But I think one of my favorites might have been the part with a guy named Kevin. He was a philosopher, right?
An associate professor.
Is he like a super celebrity or something? Because he's not only from Sweden. This is an international researcher, right?
Yeah, that's right.
From the Netherlands?
No.
Embarrassing.
Well, he is currently at Zurich University.
Oh, right. Right.
And we had the honor to have him come as a guest, both on in-depth conversations, but even to Lund University. So he even presented at our higher seminar in philosophy, but also in the Philosophical Society, which was actually packed. The room became packed, so he was a popular guest here at the university.
Yeah. He was super nice, and also I really enjoyed his. I asked a lot of questions to him about the thing he researches about folk concepts, and that was super interesting. So go and check out that episode, guys.
Okay, nice that you enjoyed that interview. I did as well a lot. It was a special time, the whole thing around his visit. So I think that was a nice thing to have an international guest as well. Yeah,
super. How about you?
Well, one recent one I think that sticks out that I think we should mention is Adrian, if we're talking about media attention. Adrian Mehic was a case here that became a cause for ethical concern. It was talked about in almost every department at Lund University. He did a study that became seen as something very controversial, even though through his own words, the study itself wasn't that, the methods he used weren't that controversial. He had done everything according to what previous researchers have done. But I think the results that he got from that either way you saw it, either that women, good-looking women, perform worse than their peers, or if you saw it the other way, that what his research showed was that the universities are biased. So either way, it was a touchy subject. And that's why it became a lot of hype and media attention around it, which caused a lot of concern for him. But at the other hand, it caused a lot of anxiety, I think, among a lot of students and faculty as well. Yeah, that's right. What did you think about that episode?
I found that that episode super interesting, not least because we invited a person who is in the middle of the heat. Do you say that in English? Like in the not conflict zone, but like
media storm for sure.
In a media storm. Let's keep it that way. That was super interesting. I didn't have especially high hopes that he would come visit us, so that was a privilege, I guess. And I believe you and I had the first long term. Do you say that? Long video interview with him. So that's cool, and I learned a lot. When I listened to him, honestly, I'm not sure on what side I am, if there are sides to take, at least. And I believe we had some feedback about that episode as well.
Yeah, that's right. I think that was probably even more interesting for me to hear people's reactions to that episode, because I had all the intentions to be critical of and ask the right questions. I had understood why it was a concern for a lot of people. I thought I had put myself into their shoes, and you know, these people that expressed concerns with this study. Then when I met Adrian, I was sort of taken by his story as well, his side, because he is a PhD student. It didn't seem like he had an agenda that he was trying to, which I think a lot of people were accusing him of, that there was an agenda behind this. I didn't get that impression, and I felt like he honestly answered my questions. So I didn't give him any questions beforehand. And I had tried my best to really ask the right questions, like I've said, and he answered them. So I must say I was satisfied to an extent. And I was surprised to hear that a lot of people thought that I was biased going into the interview. You know, that I had values such as academic freedom prioritized already. Which I do. I mean, I do think academic freedom is extremely important. But I just also feel like ethical concerns are also important. And I do feel like, as researchers, we have extra responsibility to not, and being taxpayer funded on top of it here in Sweden, we have more responsibility to do our research right and correct. And I think it was a bit unfair how the media and also the gossip around his research and the hype that it got sort of a life of its own. And I felt like it was really healthy to be able to speak to Adrian himself, and our episode with him, I think, highlighted those aspects. But I was happy to hear still that it was discussed. The episode was discussed. Even the ethics course here at Lund University, at Lux, with the humanities, we're discussing it. So people actually watched the episode in that course, student in that course. So that was fun. Another, if I can just mention another episode. It was one of the first episodes that we had with Professor Erik J. Olsen, where he talks about academic freedom and females or women in academia, how their culture of being caring and so on. He argues that makes us have more soft values when we have more women in academia, and therefore we are not as competitive anymore, and it sort of deplatforms or censors research in some way, and therefore it infringes on academic freedom. And I think that episode is our most viewed one, so it's like 2,050 views or something like that, which is a lot for us. That one became also a published, or it was quoted or researched in a published work by a genusvetare. Gender studies researcher at the Lund University, Lena Martinsson. We can actually link her paper that references in-depth conversations. We'll link it in the description. And it's called Är akademisk frihet patriarkal? Sorry. It's published in Swedish. How would you translate that? Is academia or academic freedom
a patriarchal trait or
exactly, or structure. In Kulturella Perspektiv, she published it, and so it got even noticed by people in gender studies, which of course led to our having a strong interest in inviting somebody from gender studies who could talk about this, because we've had a few people who've talked about, you even had an interview about how biological personality traits are, you know, different between the sexes. We had Petri Kajonius and even Guy Madison, the psychologist from Umeå, Professor Guy Madison. So we are really hoping for a gender perspective. We had Lena Haldenius, who came and talked about a bit about feminism and so on. But she is she's not in gender studies. So we are working on that. Maybe we should say something about how we choose who we invite to in-depth conversations.
So about the thing you just said, I mean, we have had, I was about to say quite a few, but at least like a handful of voices that have not had exactly the same opinions, for sure not, but like converging on a certain perspective, I guess, and it would be super interesting to hear voices from, I guess, the other side, to be super exaggerating and polarizing,
or at least somebody who says something that is not totally in agreement, you know, challenges some views that we've had on the
for sure. But I believe we have been inviting a few people, but perhaps they have not had the opportunity to say yes.
No, that's right. Yeah, so it's something we're working on. But so the question becomes, right now, somebody might see in-depth conversations and think that it's a platform for a certain view.
Yeah, right.
And we don't agree with that. We're trying to be objective, right?
Right.
We want to have transparency and how do we see ourselves as a platform? Let's talk about that.
Right. That's a good point.
Yeah.
I mean, let's just run through the checklist of our free fancy bullet points. So we talked about this before. We want to challenge ideas.
Yeah.
We want to promote interest in academia, and we want to boost transparency. So when we say challenge ideas, it's an important distinction. We don't want to challenge those ideas that you and I consider wrong.
No, that's
we want to challenge all ideas.
Yes. Yes. Because I think the reasoning behind that, or how I feel, is that once you do that, that's when you get to these deeper issues. You know, when you really see the ideas behind it that shape the things that we see resulting from those deeper questions. And I think those are really important to talk about and to get to. And if you don't challenge, you sort of never get anywhere. You've just accepted the status quo.
And as long as the status quo is perfect, 100% perfect, that will work fine. But the moment it is not anymore, and that's usually the case, then you will have an issue. Then you will be brainwashing yourself, believing that everything is fine while you are sitting in a burning room.
Yes. And I think it's actually one of the core fundamental ideas of academia in general to challenge and be critical. That's what we do. I mean, we have defenses even. We have to defend our own theses, you know, at every level, at every stage, at a bachelor, master's, and then PhDs.
Yeah, that's a good point. I always consider that super weird before I entered academia myself. Like, why defend? I mean, it's already explained, right? But yeah, it makes sense to actually to have an opponent, I guess. And to defend.
To not think that this is just right. Nobody can challenge my ideas. We should challenge, and I think that's a very important aspect of it. So in order to be able to do that, I think we are open for every view that a researcher has.
Yeah.
Right? I don't even... I
mean, I would even say if we have a guest who dares to claim something that I or you, Melina, don't agree with, we wouldn't throw them out, right?
I would welcome it, I would say. I welcome it, definitely.
And perhaps pose a few follow-up questions in a positive manner, I believe. It's a good thing to be a kind host and not an evil host, of course.
I think those two things are separate. I think there is an understanding that challenging an idea is not something personal to that individual. It doesn't mean that you have to be mean or rude or insisting on your point being right. It's also, I mean, it's a conversation at the end of the day, so you have to hear what the other person says in able to give a response. And I think as long as they are in academia and they are working researchers, I don't see why you wouldn't hear what they have to say. I think it's essential to actually know, because silencing or not wanting to hear, then you can never really challenge. You can't challenge it if you don't hear it, if you don't know what it is.
Yeah, I guess one might argue that there's a difference between putting your hand over the mouth of someone else, or rather putting the hand over your own ear. But the result, the outcome will be that you don't hear the opinions that you disagree with, and hence cannot challenge them. But it's a good thing that you clarify this, because we have been talking a lot about this off camera, a lot about it.
There's another interesting aspect to that. I just say before I forget it. I think some might say there is something about, you know, allowing for a diversity of ideas, but then there is another to actually highlight the ideas. And perhaps one critique against having somebody invited to talk about their ideas could be slightly more problematic than just allowing somebody to say their opinions and you don't have to listen to it, or you don't have to highlight those ideas.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I guess this could be under the title of whom to platform.
Exactly.
On. Yeah. I'm honestly not like entirely sure what my end goal in that department is, but I found it really, really hard to, I mean, like, I talk to a person and the moment I disagree with he, him, her, he, her, they, perhaps, sorry, then you have to walk away or even condemn that person. I have to be able to meet or at least listen to opinions that I feel uncomfortable to. So in that way, I guess I think
it comes back to the thing we've already spoken about, I guess. You know, if you don't like to be challenged, academia doesn't sound like the place for you. You know, and actually society doesn't, because
that's harsh.
No, but really, because you have to learn to live with people of every walks, from every background, from every walk of life. You know, most of the time. I mean, there's not that many people that are privileged to live in a little cottage in Norrland where they never have to, you know, learn to live together with other people. But in society, if we want to, then we have to, you know, we can be offended, but then we have to look at why, you know, and then try to think about, is this right? Why do I feel uncomfortable with this? You know, and challenge our own emotions around things that we feel uncomfortable with. Yeah. And I think if we try to not want to expose ourselves to anything uncomfortable at all, we become worse off as a society, as human individuals, in our intellect. I think I don't understand why we would ever want to adopt such a value of not wanting to be challenged.
Right. But I guess we could also be talking about, does that mean that we could invite anyone, or do we draw the borders, I guess, around the ivory tower of academia? I mean, we haven't had on any journalists or like non-academics, I believe.
No, but I think that's on purpose. I think that's very purposefully. Well, I think as long as it is somebody from academia, I don't think there is someone I could say that we shouldn't invite. No one. I think I believe in the process, and of course I think the process can be better, but I think if you've gotten through all these things that you have to in order to become a state employee at the university, you've gone through checks and balances that makes you qualified to be here. To a certain degree, you know, you have to be able to. You're playing along on the same game. Like the game is to be able to defend your view, not just spit out a view, not just have an opinion and people should accept that opinion. Right. You have to argue for that opinion. Actually, it's not an opinion anymore. You have to have some foundation to why you think and reason the way you do, and you have to have thought about it for a while. And I think that qualifies listening to. I think, I don't know, like I don't think this is the right platform for a politician, for example. Right. Because they do, even some views that they don't agree with, they might have to stand up for because of their political party or other reasons that I'm not familiar with, and it's really kind of not my area. But the world of academia that I want to believe in, and that I want to be part of promoting that healthy image of what academia could be. So I think that's what in-depth conversations should stick to. That's kind of what we've talked about a lot too.
I totally agree. I was thinking of, does that mean that this, of course the answer is no, does the same checks and balances apply to students? Would we invite a random student most students are kind, but perhaps they haven't gone through the same checks and balances as, how do you draw this border? As teaching staff or people that are higher in the academic hierarchy? We haven't had any student on, but we've been talking about PhD students, right? Yeah.
So that brings us actually to our next point. Let's leave it a bit mystical there. Our point about our future and what we see in-depth conversation developing into or more of. And that is one thing that we talked about, inviting PhD students, right? And doing maybe shorter episodes where we can just hear about the research and maybe their experience with their PhD experience as employees, but also as students, and if they've experienced any. I mean, we had Adrian Mehic, he's a PhD student,
right?
But that was that particular case, so it wasn't in general about his research. But more students like that, perhaps. I don't know, when do we experience that we get censored? How important is the topic that we choose, that it should be popular or in subject, or is it sort of what we just find are interesting? What's the driving factor behind our projects and so on? I think that would be interesting.
For sure.
What do you look forward to in in-depth conversations?
I'm very much looking forward to this, whatever it will be, like a mini series about PhD students. That will be super interesting. And also, I tend to read a lot of books myself. So anytime when I read a book about a topic, I feel like, oh, we should invite such a person to in-depth conversations. I've been reading a lot about actually religious history lately. So perhaps some guests in that area. We'll see.
I think that's one of your really strong sides, that you read so much and you're so knowledgeable and also very curious in diverse subjects, in a lot of different topics. So I think you've brought that as an asset to in-depth conversations.
Oh, stop it. But
so
thank you.
That's amazing, because the research, we do put a lot of work into researching and trying to sound balanced, right?
Not only sound balanced, be balanced, perhaps.
Well, at least try to be as much as we can. I mean, and that is one of the goals of in-depth conversations, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And we hope to continue that work.
Yeah.
Maybe our 3 mottos are worth repeating. What do you think?
Sure.
Yeah. So we have that I've emphasized a million times, to challenge ideas is one of our great one.
Challenge ideas, awesome. The second one is to promote interest in specifically in academia. Yeah,
so we touched about that on how to get the information from the ivory tower out, right? And that kind of makes sense if you want people to be interested in what's happening in the ivory tower.
Yeah, and it's supposed to be like tredje uppgiften, the third task of a researcher.
Super important in Sweden in particular.
Yeah. And perhaps we could facilitate or help with that. So challenge ideas, promote interest.
And the third one is to boost transparency.
Boost transparency. What do we mean, Melina?
What do we mean by that, to boost transparency? I think we both feel like it's extremely important to uphold the values of academia, which is to objectively seek knowledge, right? To seek knowledge. And in that process, it's important to keep transparent in your work. We always see that in all kinds of research, that you have to publish the method part. We're so meticulous and in that process. And when we publish papers, we have to state our conflicts of interests. Right. You know, where did our funding come from for this project? So transparency is an important part of academia and academic research. And so we would love to boost that and to keep it alive and just keep the researchers even transparent. So not hiding behind computers writing, but even seeing them in person and as human beings.
Yeah, for sure. You know this better than I, but isn't there like a movement in research in general towards open data? And
that's right.
You tell me, what is open data?
Well, we call it open access. When you publish something, you would want it, especially in Sweden, the universities pay for that, so the academic themselves don't have to. But this is a double-edged sword, actually, because there is researchers that can't pay for open access because it's incredibly expensive. And in that case, you know, academics have an interest to promote their work as well, because that will keep them in business, so to speak. Right. More interest in your subject or in your research area will keep the money coming and will keep you in business, whereas less citations, for example, from a not open access article will do less so. And I think we should leave it there as a cliffhanger, because we will actually ask our next guest on in-depth conversations about these very questions and the ideas around this. Yeah. So thank you so much for discussing in-depth conversation, the meta episode with me, Jonatan.
Thank you, Melina.